Hi everyone, and welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. The topic of today's video is science and spirituality. Are they compatible? There's a couple of reasons why I wanted to make this video. The first reason is because with the new videos and the new topics that I'm starting to cover in those videos, I'm really starting to venture into territory that is a bit strange. I'm talking about magic, I'm talking about past lives, I'm talking about energy. And the fact that I'm touching upon topics such as these is probably causing a lot of assumptions in people's minds to pop up about the kind of worldview I must have, about the mechanics of the universe, and believing in things that are a bit out there or maybe go against the grain of science. That assumption would be incorrect, and I'm going to make my position clear in this video, exactly what I believe in terms of the relationship between science and spirituality. So it's really about clarifying my position so that people realize they don't misinterpret what I'm saying as encouraging people to believe in something that's unscientific. So they don't misunderstand me and think that I'm encouraging people to believe in something that I'm not encouraging them to believe in, or to believe in something more fantastical than what I'm actually trying to suggest. The second reason for this video is because of a trend that I've seen in the last 2 years, and that trend is the rise of so-called conspirituality. This is where people with kind of alternative spiritual beliefs have adopted, as part of the nexus of the beliefs that they hold, really out there sorts of ideas, like anti-vax kind of ideas, believing in the QAnon conspiracy theory, and a whole host of really extreme political views and extreme anti-intellectual views, which, if they spread too far and acted upon by too many people, really present a profound danger to the well-being of the community. So as somebody who also adheres to alternative spiritual beliefs, broadly speaking, I feel a certain moral obligation as somebody who holds those beliefs and also has a platform, small though it is at the moment, to provide an alternative perspective on the relationship between science and logical reasoning and objective truth and the pursuit of spiritual truth. And we don't need to throw anything away out of all of those different ways of looking at the world. They can coexist together, and that's what I really want to try and encourage in this video. And maybe a perspective that is spiritual, acknowledges this kind of alternative spirituality that is emerging, but is still very rational and doesn't abandon common sense. Perhaps that perspective will be refreshing to a lot of people. So, science and spirituality, are they compatible? Well, it's only really in the last few hundred years that people have believed that they're not compatible, or that they're somehow diametrically opposed. For the longest time in human history, science and spiritual practice, in particular science and magic, were one and the same. And earlier disciplines that were rooted in spirituality and religion, what gave rise to later scientific disciplines. So, for example, we only have chemistry because it developed out of alchemy. We only have astronomy because it developed out of astrology. And medicine, this is an important one. Modern medicine, the modern pharmaceutical industry developed out of patenting certain compounds, certain chemicals which were present in certain herbs, which formed part of the tradition of the cunning women of Europe, that were used as healing herbs and remedies. These were among the women who were burnt at the stake for being witches. So what you see here, rather than two opposing worldviews, is instead a single worldview which has branched out and deviated in two different directions at a certain point. And the scientific disciplines really continue to explore the material world and how that operates. And the more spiritual disciplines tend to look at what is beyond that, or that which is more immaterial, perhaps. And so they're dealing with different aspects of existence, and there's no reason why they should have to be counterposed to each other, particularly given their common history. And once you understand that common history, it becomes much harder for one side to dismiss the belief or the discipline of the other side. Atheistic types who prescribe to what is called scientism quite often, the religion of materialistic science as it is at a particular time in history, and that being infallible and unquestionable, which is itself an unscientific point of view, but I'll get into that another time. These people who adhere to scientism make out like for thousands of years the human race just existed in a state of darkness and fear and superstition, and we just didn't understand anything, and all of our prior endeavors to understand the universe were mistakes, and we made nothing but mistakes, and we learnt nothing, and we just went around in circles in our own ignorance until at last the illustrious ones, the materialistic scientists, came along and presented a radical new worldview which shattered that old inferior way of looking at the world. And thank goodness for modern science, because it finally broke with the ignorance of the past. But what that view, that assumption or that implication by scientism fails to appreciate is that modern sciences developed out of those earlier disciplines, which were very rooted in a spiritual or magical view of the universe. And yes, they got a lot of things wrong, as science itself has. I mean, science has produced phrenology, eugenics, and science has also produced scientific racism, the classification of the races of humanity, completely false. And it has also produced the pathologizing of really natural human tendencies and aspects of the human psyche which are simply ostracized based on a lack of social acceptability rather than any sort of medical or pathological reason. So science has made plenty of mistakes as well. And our early attempts at science also included a number of mistakes. But we also have inherited a lot of really good things from the disciplines that went before. There was some understanding of chemicals and chemical reactions that came out of alchemy. There was some understanding of the movement of the heavenly bodies and how to make calculations based on the movement of the planets that came out of early astronomy, which was very tied to astrology. But it's very convenient for scientism to dismiss a discipline outright from our ancient past, because if you can do that, then you can eliminate the possibility that way of thinking, those ancient traditions, had anything else useful to offer us, i.e. any of the spiritual knowledge that came out of those societies or those cultures. So it's a bit disingenuous. Newton himself acknowledged that he would not have had the ability to reach the scientific discoveries that he was able to make without standing on the shoulders of giants. That is the work and the discoveries of those who went before. And before modern science in earnest, the giants were people who were practicing alchemy and magic and other arts which came out of a spiritual or religious worldview. Of all of the things that weren't of any use in the forms of science that we had in the past, I don't think that it's the case that a spiritual way of seeing the world is one of them. Fundamentally, the goal of much spiritual practice, particularly magical practice, and the goal of much scientific practice is one and the same. It is the attempt to discover new truth by inquiring about the nature of reality and questioning something about the nature of reality, and then doing things to test the limit of what we know, to try and discover something new. There are quite a few very eminent scientists who also had very interesting spiritual beliefs. This is something that the modern scientific community really tries to sweep under the rug. It's a real embarrassment for them. And they want to pretend that it's not a thing. Is that confirmation bias? Is that selection bias? I think it might be. But this reality that they don't want to acknowledge is that there were all these scientists with these unusual spiritual beliefs. So John Dee in Elizabethan times made fantastic contributions to many areas of academia, many different sciences and other intellectual disciplines which shaped the modern world. He was a magician. He was Queen Elizabeth's court astrologer, and he created an entire system of magic which was designed to invoke angels so that he could communicate with them and receive messages from them. And that was an important part of his work. Isaac Newton, who developed a theory of gravity, he believed in Bible prophecy. He studied it obsessively, and he wrote a commentary on the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel, where he tried to predict the exact date of the end of the world based on biblical prophecy. So he believed in the ability of human beings who were in touch with some kind of spiritual power to be able to intuit knowledge about the future of the human race. That gets brushed under the rug. You've got Albert Einstein. He talks about God in many of his quotes, and it's not God in the traditional sense, but he does have some concept of divinity or the divine, which he seems to be making accolades to all the time. And it seems to be more than just symbolic or poetic language or allegorical language. He seems to really believe this to some degree. And Albert Einstein also had a copy of Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine on his desk and would often peruse it, and found the contents therein intellectually stimulating when he was engaging in his own work. Particularly what Blavatsky says about the nature of matter. And then there's also Jack Parsons, the founder of JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, who is responsible for developing the first solid rocket fuel. A brilliant scientist. He was a member of the Ordo Templi Orientis. He was actually a lodge master in California at one point, and he was an avid practitioner of magic, ceremonial magic, and he would recite a hymn to Pan before his rocket launches. So very much steeped in the occult. You can't just conveniently say, well, everything else that this person did was brilliant, but these other spiritual beliefs that they had, that's just a bit of an outlier, we'll ignore that. There's always a reason for everything a person believes. And it's the same intellect that came up with the scientific theories that also sees some value or some merit in particular spiritual beliefs. And those great minds saw no problem in reconciling their scientific beliefs and their respect for scientific ways of explaining the world on the one hand, and things that spirituality might explain on the other. I think a big part of the problem, particularly in modern times, is that this whole kind of religion versus science thing has become a part of the culture wars. It's become a point of the general polarization that we see in society more generally. So either you are 100% atheist and scientific and you believe that we live in a material world and religion is nothing but superstition, or you only believe in religion and you only believe that faith-based belief is right and there's no need for science at all because we just need to believe it on faith, and science is bad because it contradicts our faith. And there's no in between. And there's no way of saying, well, maybe science is right about some things and maybe spirituality is right about other things, and the problem is that science and spirituality aren't staying in their lanes anymore. And science is trying to tell religious people about religion, and religious people are trying to tell scientists about science. That's the problem. And I think that spiritual people need to not fear science. If you're spiritual, fundamentally you're motivated by the search for truth, and particularly objective truth. And that's what the absolute is, ultimately. It is the culmination of the search for objective truth. That's what God is. So we should value tools that can be used to find objective truth. And science is one of those. And it tells us a lot of really useful things about the material world that we inhabit, or at least the way that we experience the material world. And that ought to be respected. You know, science has done amazing things. It's lifted the quality of life of so many human beings, and brought us closer to the kind of world that all of the ancient religious texts promise is waiting for us in the future. But look, just because science can understand some things doesn't mean that science can explain everything. There are still many mysteries in the universe, and any good scientist will acknowledge that there's still plenty to be discovered, and plenty we don't know. And the greatest scientists in history have not been the ones who just wrote to learn the same theories that everyone agrees upon in the scientific community. They're the ones who dare to think differently, who dare to wonder whether they can develop a theory about something in the universe that we don't understand, or perhaps develop a theory about something in the universe we thought we understood, but our understanding was incomplete. And spirituality makes the same inquiries about certain scientific assumptions. But the great spiritual aspirants, like the great scientists, are the ones whose curiosity compels them to explore that possibility. Whereas a lot of people in the scientific community, particularly adherents of scientism, people associated with new atheism, they scoff at anything that doesn't fit with their view of the universe, and they're not even willing to countenance the idea that their certain theories that they hold dear might be so radically wrong, or that there might be merit in certain lines of inquiry which into the universe and how it works, which perhaps have a spiritual bent to them, or seem to support things that spirituality says about the universe. But that kind of dismissive attitude is not in itself scientific. And so that doesn't represent a discounting of spirituality by science, but rather a discounting of certain religious beliefs by another religious belief, another form of fundamentalism, because you can create a fundamentalism around the prevailing scientific theories as well. But science can be an incredible tool for spiritual people as well. More precisely, the scientific method that underlies science can be of great value. Arguably, the most preeminent Western initiatic system today is that of the AA, the Argenteum Astrum, and their motto is the aim of religion, the method of science. And there are elements of the AA system which incorporate rationalism and science and the scientific method. And so part of that is a rigorous testing of every kind of practice that you engage in, making meticulous notes about the conditions under which you did that, what the result is, if you repeat the same practice, what the result is every time you do it. So you can identify long-term trends, you can identify things that work, things that don't work. And it really enriches the way that spiritual practice is undertaken by introducing the scientific method into the spiritual practice itself. The alternative is to just get lost in fantasies and dreams and delusions in the sphere of Yesod, in the lunar sphere, as it's called. And that's not really going to get you anywhere. So are science and spirituality compatible? Yes, they are. There's no reason why you can't be a spiritual person and also acknowledge the merits in the scientific way of looking at the world when it comes to certain aspects of the physical world, and there's no reason why you need to not believe in anything spiritual if you believe in science.